Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the 10-minute book talk, where three best-selling authors talk all things bookish with you for 10 short and sweet minutes every day. I am your lead hostess today, Marie Bostwick, and I am joined by the fabulous, the delightful, the has the best scarves in the universe, Rachel Linden. Normally, our dear darling friend Katherine Reay would be with us, but she's out on book tour, that silly old thing. So, and I'm sure doing wonderfully well. But so it's just me and Rachel today. But I have such a treat for you. I am so excited about this. I adored this book, took it with me on vacation, couldn't put it down. So interesting about somebody you probably think you know, but you really don't. And so I'm going to have her tell you about it. But we have ReShonda Tate with us today to tell us about her wonderful new book, The Queen of Sugar Hill. ReShonda, welcome to the 10-minute book talk, and tell us a little about your fabulous new book.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm also on a book tour, hence the reason you have the blurred background. I'm in the middle of a tour now, and I am promoting this book that I absolutely love. It's about the life of Hattie McDaniel. And when I began this research process, there was so much I found out that I didn't know. And so I am just thrilled to be spreading the information about her, because people think they know her and they don't. And then there is a whole just slew of people that have never even heard of her. So I'm happy to be introducing them to her and getting people to take off their 21st century lens and look at Hattie McDaniel and appreciate her for the legend that she is.
Absolutely. And I learned so much in this book. And, for those of you who are maybe like, wait a minute, Hattie McDaniel, that name rings a bell. You probably know her best, although she did many roles and a lot of radio, which I didn't know about. Anyway, you know her best as playing Mammy in Gone with the Wind, and she won an Oscar for that, which was monumental at the time. Anyway, such a great book, such a great book. But I want to know, what made you decide to tell this story?
Like many people, I was introduced to her through Gone with the Wind, even though she had 70 movies prior to this, that I didn't know that. But I was introduced because my grandmother loved Gone with the Wind and I did not. I didn't. My grandmother said, "Why don't you like it?" I didn't like Hattie's, the fact that she was a servant. I didn't like her stereotypical performance. And my grandmother said, "But she's playing a maid and I am a maid. So why are you looking at her with disdain?" And then she said, "Besides, it was 1939. What did you expect her to play? Scarlett O'Hara?" And it was that point that I started looking at Hattie McDaniel in a different light. And I took off my 21st century lens and was able to appreciate her for the time that she was in.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really excited. I have not had the pleasure. Marie had the pleasure of taking this book. I have not yet had the pleasure, but we live 10 minutes apart, so I'm going to get the pleasure soon. But I'm curious, as you were researching, what were a few things that surprised you that you learned about Hattie McDaniel?
Well, there were a few things. So number one was the amount of information on the internet that was wrong, because you immediately go to the internet to start doing research, and I found so much erroneous information. Even now, if you go to Wikipedia, it'll talk about Hattie's husband George and how he died in a gambling fight. Hattie never had a husband named George. There are little things like that that were wrong on the internet, so I really had to dig deep. I went into research mode. I spent 3 years researching, and I went beyond the internet. So that was a lot of the information that I found that was erroneous. It was finding the correct information. And then the Sugar Hill, where the title came from. I had no idea that Hattie McDaniel was behind led the Supreme Court case that led to restrictive covenants being struck down. And restrictive covenants basically says that you can't sell your home to anyone who is not of European blood. And that's what Hattie's neighbors used to sue her to try and get her out of her brand new mansion that she bought. And she took them to court, which was unheard of in the 40s, and she won. And that was the catalyst for the Supreme Court case that was struck down. So Black and brown people can live wherever they want because Hattie McDaniel led the fight. And I didn't know that. So I was surprised at that.
Oh, amazing. I had no idea either. Oh,
So many things. And I didn't know. Of course, I knew Gone with the Wind, right? Because, as a girl, I read Gone with the Wind. I'm of the age where, like, everything I learned about sex, I learned from Gone with the Wind. So sort of It's sort of true. We didn't talk about them. It was,
stuff.
you know, those scenes were very steamy in the book when I was a kid. Oh, I'm off topic, as I tend to be. So, but another thing that was so fascinating to me is she had a very successful and multi-season hit on a radio program, a radio show that I didn't know about at all. So I knew nothing about that. There's so much I learned, and she is such a fascinating woman. And I think one of the points you make, she was making the most of the opportunity she had as a Black woman in that time period.
That's
and
right.
yeah, and the problem is she really, in some ways, kind of got it from both barrels. You'd expect her to like get criticism perhaps from white people and not acceptance, but she was also being criticized in her own community. And I have to tell you, for me, the villain of this book is Walter White. So let's talk about him. What the heck? What was his problem? And why was he so mean to Hattie?
Yeah, Walter White was the executive secretary of the NAACP, which is the same thing as the president. And he was on this crusade. Now, I will say he was well-meaning because he wanted better representation of Black people in cinema, but he did it at the expense of Hattie McDaniel. There was one scene that I include in the book where the 1942 NAACP National Convention, he invites Hattie out to this. She thinks she's about to be honored, and instead he brings Lena Horne on stage and says, this is the epitome of beauty we want Hollywood to see. She's thin, she's light-skinned, and she's articulate. Right? And we don't want to see Hattie McDaniel's Mammy anymore. And Hattie had to sit in that audience with her head held high as thousands of people saw him do this. And he was just on a crusade, but Hattie would say to him, what would you have me to do? I would love to play Wonder Woman. I'd love to play these other roles, but these are the only roles I'm allowed to play. So I'm making the best with what I have.
Now, it's not all sad, because Hattie is somebody who inspired great affection in a lot of people. And one of her very best friends is somebody who's very dear to my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an 8x10 of Clark Gable. It is hung in my home for many, many decades, because I used to, as a girl, I did theater, and I used to sing the song Dear Mr. Gable, and this was my prop, and I would sing to it, but I also had a giant crush on him. So that was one of her very dearest friends. Tell us a little bit about that friendship.
I liked Clark Gable before this. I fell in love with Clark Gable during this process. Clark was an ally before we even knew what the word was. He was in a time when it was uncommon. He was a dear friend to Hattie. They loved practical jokes, so they played practical jokes on each other. And they were there for her when she was not invited to the Atlanta premiere of Gone with the Wind, which had over 1 million people. Clark was like, well, I'm not going. If they don't want you there, I'm not going. And she's like, you're the star and you're king of Hollywood. You got to go. But he was always doing that type of thing. And they just were really dear friends to each other. And I loved their friendship.
Yeah, I love that, because my heart just ached for her in parts in this book. And it was so nice that she had really people who loved and cared for her and stood up for her. So I clearly could talk to you about this all day, but it's the 10-minute book talk, so we have to wrap it up. But I do have one last question for you. ReShonda Tate, what's bringing you joy today?
Oh my goodness. It's the simple things. I am on tour. I'm driving. And what brought me joy today is that I'm in the passenger side, and my husband is like, where do you need to go? You are the passenger princess, and I am driving you. And it's little things like that that bring you joy. He said, just so I can rest. And the older I get, the more important rest is. So that is what's bringing me joy today.
He's a good man.
That is
wonderful. ReShonda, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy tour schedule to be with us. My friends, run, do not walk to your bookstore or your internet or wherever it is and get yourself a copy of The Queen of Sugar Hill. It's a very fascinating story. You are going to learn things you didn't know you needed to know. So thank you. And you know what else you need to do? You need to be back here next week on the 10-minute book talk, because clearly we've got all the best books, the best authors, the best stories, and the best audience. So we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Oh. And the best pictures of Clark Gable.
You won't get that anywhere else. Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.